Exactly 1 month ago, the Trump administration abducted and imprisoned a Maryland man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They flew him and hundreds of other men to a prison in El Salvador. The government has since called imprisoning Mr. Abrego Garcia, at least, a mistake. 5 days ago, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous 9-0 decision, ordered the Trump administration that they needed to bring him back. They needed to, quote, facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. Well, they haven't done so yet. And today in court, a federal judge in Maryland just excoriated Trump administration lawyers over the administration's refusal to comply with that order, the administration's refusal to go get Mr. Abrego Garcia, or at least prove that they're trying to. The judge, quote, just so everyone knows where my current thinking is, Mr. Abrego Garcia has already won his injunctive relief. It was affirmed not only by the Fourth Circuit, but by the Supreme Court. We're here today to talk about the scope of the remedy, which means that while expeditiousness is of the utmost importance, because it is a fact now of this record that every day Mr. Abrego Garcia is detained in the prison in El Salvador, that is a day of further irreparable harm. At the same time, if not this court, then who to engage in process? It's process that is in the roots of our Constitution. So we have to give process to both sides, but we're going to move. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. We will talk about the contours of this, but that's where I am right now. At one point, the Trump administration lawyer argued about the meaning of the word facilitate, calling it a term of art within immigration law. The judge said in response, quote, I'm not even sure what you mean, but as a factual matter, I do need evidence in this regard, because to date, what the record shows is that nothing has been done. Nothing. I've asked for daily reports, daily, by individuals with personal knowledge, and I've gotten very little information of any value. Trump administration lawyer, Your Honor, I think what we have submitted reflects that there have been significant steps. In particular, we cited to this issue was raised at the highest possible level. We cited to this issue was raised at the highest possible levels yesterday. It was raised in the Oval Office between two heads of state, between the President of the United States and the President of El Salvador. The issue was specifically discussed. The judge, a reporter asked a question. The defendants have never responded to the question, what steps have you taken? The plaintiff is asking, why don't the defendants just ask, you will release him? I've got no answer on that. And in response to this notion that what happened in the Oval Office is satisfactory, that's not before the court. I mean, you include a transcript. I don't know if what this transcript is supposed to be assisting me in. But the bottom line is, it was a very simple directive. My question that the high court squarely affirmed, I can ask, what have you done? I've got nothing. I've got no real response, nor have I gotten any legitimate legal justification for not answering the question. That's why we need to move to the next step. Because in fairness, if you're not going to answer the questions that the plaintiffs put within the scope of my order, then you will justify why. You will cite privilege. You'll follow the rules. I will make a determination. That is what we do in this House. That is the most fair I can be. She said, and I don't consider what happened yesterday, meaning in the Oval Office, as really evidence before this court. Lawyers for Mr. Abrego Garcia then asked the judge to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court over their failure to comply with the court's orders. The judge did not rule out finding them in contempt. She said first she wants to make the Trump administration submit evidence and sit for depositions, and quickly. Trump administration's lawyer voiced his concerns about scheduling those depositions quickly. He said, quote, Your Honor, I don't know right now their availability. I assume that can be arranged in a 7-day period, but I can't say that conclusively. Whereupon the judge said this, well, cancel vacation. Cancel other appointments. I'm usually pretty good about things like that in my courtroom, but not this time. So I expect all hands on deck. It won't be a convenience issue. That's what I'm saying. I will be flexible if you need to accommodate depositions, whether it's in the courthouse because you have the court available to call balls and strikes as the depositions go on. I'm going to be available. If you need to do it at odd hours or weekends, I'm also available. Trump administration lawyer, we will move expeditiously, Your Honor. Judge, okay, I appreciate that. After today's hearing, that Maryland judge put in writing her order requiring the Trump administration to turn over evidence of its efforts to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return home. The judge spelled out an expedited schedule. She is instructing Abrego Garcia's lawyers to submit their requests for evidence by tomorrow evening. Those requests can pertain to, quote, the current physical location and custodial status of Abrego Garcia, what steps, if any, defendants have taken to facilitate his immediate return to the U.S., and what additional steps the Trump administration will take and when to facilitate his return. The Trump administration must reply to those requests no later than 5 p.m. on Monday. Mr. Abrego Garcia's lawyers may also depose at least 4 members of the Trump administration on this matter by next Wednesday. Joining us now is Reena Gandhi. She's a partner at Murray Osorio Immigration Law Firm. She's one of the attorneys representing Mr. Abrego Garcia in this matter. Ms. Gandhi, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So we got this transcript right before the show started tonight, and we have been sort of going through it and pulling from it as we can. Let me ask you if I missed any important details or mischaracterized anything of what happened at today's hearing.
No, I think that is a very good summary. Those are the highlights that I certainly took away. No, I think that was accurate.
What do you expect to happen next over the course of this next week in terms of what is now a court-ordered but not yet manifest, order to have your client come home?
Well, I do believe that we will be able to get some answers from these very people who wrote these affidavits, providing us not very much before. I think when confronted with very specific questions where they can't just file a report saying we're not required to say anything, will hopefully return results. They can't hide the ball here anymore. You know, and this hearing today really helped us move forward, move towards bringing Mr. Abrego Garcia back home.
Are we now in a situation, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm just observing these things as a lay observer here, but with the Trump administration and the president himself asserting that it is not within the power of the U.S. government to bring your client home, that it's up to El Salvador because they operate the prison where the U.S. is paying to hold him. Is that assertion from the president and from the Trump administration essentially wholly outside these legal proceedings now and sort of beside the point? It seems as if the judge is proceeding on the evidence that's been put forward to the court and not on the basis of these sort of political statements that have been made by the president and others to excuse what the administration isn't doing.
Well, that's precisely right. Before the court, no evidence has been presented. There's no reason, no argument for why they can't at least show what they have done and what they plan to do. Unfortunately, I think it's because the answer is they haven't been planning to do anything. But hopefully with the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to get some real answers.
Reena Gandhi, a partner at Murray Osorio Immigration Law Firm, one of the attorneys representing Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The plight of your client here has captured the mind and the heart of the country in a lot of ways. Most of the people who have heard his name for the first time here will never, ever know him as a person. But what the government has tried to do in his name has absolutely galvanized people to recognize the scale of what this administration's ambitions are toward destruction of human rights and civil rights. Your representation of him is a real service to the country. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Joining me now is the 2024 vice presidential candidate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Governor, you've been out doing these town halls. We just played a clip of one in Lorain, Ohio. I'm just curious what have you encountered there? Anything surprising to you about the vibe out there, given that it's 85 days in the new administration, very far from campaign season in either direction?
Yeah, well, good to be with you, Chris. Well, I think the biggest thing, I asked at one of these, how many folks have never been to a political type of event? And even I was surprised the number of hands went up, nearly half the crowd. So, look, the Democrats who are engaged, like you're talking about, and I agree with you, a lot of people are going about their daily lives, and there's just so much chaos and so many crises, it doesn't feel like the shift that we know is happening is there. I think the thing was encouraging to me is people are picking up on it fast. This is not performative resistance, if you will. This is people really concerned, and they're telling their stories that are very personal, whether it's Parkinson's and depending on Medicaid or what's happening with them at the VA. They're telling those stories in front of their neighbors, and it's very raw. It's a lot of emotion, but they're very engaged. So I think the biggest thing, and this was like Martins Ferry, you know, right across from Wheeling, West Virginia. This is an area that used to be strongly Democratic. It flipped the other way. But there were a lot of folks there saying, none of this is what we voted for. None of this is what they talked about. And so I think there is an awakening, if you will, of folks that are really engaging in a way that I quite honestly haven't seen. We've seen big crowds at rallies. This feels different to me. I mean, these are Tuesday nights in Lorain where they've never had one at a high school. They fill the auditorium and then they fill the gym. They're not coming to see me. I'm coming to see them. And I think that's what feels different.
Yeah, let me follow up on that one thing you said. One of the things I think that's been difficult for a lot of us who sort of do this professionally to navigate, even with people in our lives who are educated people who read the news, people who are, you know, plugged in, is just when you're paying attention every moment, it's hard to convey how bad it is, what they are trying to do.
Yes.
And then there's this gap, this sort of alienating gap between what their aspirations are, which truly are like apocalyptically bad, in my humble opinion. And then just like the fact that we're all, you know, you go get coffee, you pick up your kid, you're on vacation, like it's normal. And I'm wondering how you sort of are thinking about navigating that as someone who is, you know, an elected representative of the people of Minnesota, someone who talks to people and tries to sort of, you know, communicate.
Yeah. Well, you want to be a calming presence. Look, I've done this through a global pandemic. I did it through the unrest of George Floyd. And you want to convey factual information and you want to normalize. Your first segment couldn't have been more spot on. I've been using, and I made this statement at one time, the road to authoritarianism is littered with people telling you you're overreacting. I have had hair on fire for a while, and I know there's, you know, we can't swing at everything. He's just out there flooding the zone to distract you from the real stuff he's doing. I have come to understand what Donald Trump, what pops into his head and he says, he's going to carry it out. Once again, he talked about the tariffs. He talked about, you know, he's going to deport people. And this whole thing with Mr. Abreu Garcia, it's that old wisdom and terrifying is if you're not speaking up for this man, there will be no one left to speak up for you. Whether it's Chris Krebs that they're going after for simply, I know Chris Krebs. He's a Republican. He was there to provide election security in 2020. He did it, and all he said was it was a fair election. They're coming. They're going to do this. So I think the biggest thing is I'm convinced now he's not going to listen to the courts. And I've been saying there is a finer firewall, and it's the people. That's why these rallies, that's why these town halls, that's why this engagement, it's not meant to scare people. It's meant to empower people, because I will tell you what, Republican members of Congress are not afraid of the people. They're afraid of Donald Trump. They are starting to become afraid of the people. That's why they're not doing these town halls. They need to be afraid and come forward. I was a member of Congress. You need to stand in front of them and say why gutting the VA makes sense. Why did you allow an unelected official like Elon Musk be able to take away Social Security, to be able to get that data? So I think what's happening, Chris, is that it's not about terrifying people. It's about just simply and very calmly showing them they are headed towards this. Donald Trump has said it. You know, what terrifies me is he has talked in the past about nuclear war being winnable. He thinks the tariffs, and you think that's terrifying? Look what he talks about. And if he says it, he plans on doing it.
Yeah, just to clarify, and I know you mean this because of the times we live in, you mean politically afraid of the people as opposed to physically afraid of the people, which is an important distinction. Given the world we live in. I know you mean that. I just want to be very clear about that.
No, well, yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that, because I will guarantee you that clip is already on Fox News to try and say the radicalness is coming from the Democrats. It's being afraid of the people speaking their mind to them. They're afraid of the voters voting them out because they voted for these bad things. But they are more terrified that Donald Trump will say something about them or primarying them. And I don't know what it is about these people clinging to these jobs. The job of a congressman is a privilege, but it ain't the greatest job in the world. And I don't know why you're giving up your dignity, the responsibility you have to hold that job. But you're right. They think that they can disrespect the voters. And that's the feeling I got in these town halls. Don't disrespect us. Come and ask questions. And just to be clear, I did one in Texas, and there was a gentleman there that was opposed to vaccines. And he stood up and asked his question and said that. And I responded that, you know, the research shows that. You've got measles in Texas. We should be addressing them. But it's not. These are folks that just want to be heard, even though their issues weren't agreeing with mine. So I don't know. This is the time to do this. I'm going to thank all the people who are out there, all the people, and you just had Senator Van Hollen, who there's nobody better. He has to speak up for his constituent because they do plan. If they think they can get away with this, they will press it further.
You've given some interviews about the 2024 campaign, and I think all of us have a kind of things are so bad right now that allergy to like too much retroactive, thinking. But I did want to follow up on one thing where you talked about some of the mistakes you thought the campaign made. One of them was sort of failing in outreach to Latino voters, which I think is borne out by the data. Not speaking enough, just being a little too cautious, which I think I agree with too. You talked about the unpopular stance of the Biden administration on Gaza. And I want to just ask about whether you think that campaign, the Harris-Walz campaign, should have made a more decisive substantive policy break with the administration's policy on Gaza.
Look, I think retroactively, Chris, you could put it into more of a context. I think going back to July and watching when decisions were being made so quickly, the question was, would there be a primary? Time didn't have it. The threat was real. I think being able to clearly articulate, as I think the vice president was doing wonderfully around things like home care for using Medicare or making sure we're investing in home ownership, we could have been clear that there was a different agenda going forward. I think the time crunch made it difficult. And I think in a change election, it was difficult to show that there was a differentiation. But what I know now is, and again, that this is not all that surprising, but this is the consequence of not winning an election. And I think your point about, and I do agree with this, I think you have to flood the zone. I think the Republicans dominating the media environments that are, adjacent to what we're normally used to, we've got to be out there. And I think it's worth taking a risk to misspeak. I think it's worth it to take questions unscripted, unscreened, standing in front of people, because I think they're hungry for that. And I think Vice President Harris, her presence in those moments, I watched it, she is winning folks over. Just do more of it.
In that spirit, very quickly here, but on the Gaza question, should there have been a more definitive break with the administration on Gaza specifically?
Well, I think we would have been clearer because a Harris administration wouldn't have us in the situation we are now. Nothing has gotten better. The situation with Donald Trump of stumping on that, we could have been in a different place. That wasn't believed by a large number of people, but I think it's clear now. And what I would say is we still need to have a two-state solution. We still need to bring peace to Gaza. We still need self-determination for the Palestinians, and Israel's needs to right for its security. Those pauses haven't changed. Donald Trump's doing none of that.
Governor Tim Walz, thank you for making time with us tonight. Appreciate it.
We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene buy that dip. I got one question for her. How much did you make? How much did you make off of people's despair? How much did you make off that panic? How much did you make off of that suffering? No more. We can't accept it.
Put that picture back up. That is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking to a packed arena outside of Boise, Idaho last night, forcefully calling out her colleague, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for some curiously timed stock trades. Look at that crowd. Wow. Greene disclosed on Monday that she had purchased as much as $315,000 worth of stock on April 8th and April 9th. That's the day before and the day of Donald Trump's announcement that he was pausing a sweeping set of global tariffs. It's an announcement that sent the stock market soaring. The day before Trump's climb down on tariffs, she also dumped between $50,000 and $100,000 in Treasury bills. Now, when asked about last week's transactions, Greene told the Associated Press this, quote, "I have signed a fiduciary agreement to allow my financial advisor to control my investments. All of my investments are reported with full transparency," end quote. Now, since members of Congress are required by law to disclose their stock trades within 30 days of making them, we could learn more about who else may have made money off of Donald Trump's man-made stock market chaos in the coming days and weeks. Joining our conversation is New York Times congressional correspondent Annie Carney. She is bylined on that reporting we read from. Christie's with us as well. Annie Carney, take us through what you and your colleagues are reporting.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the first people who bought on that April 8th, April 9th timeframe to file. She generally files pretty quickly, but we saw her capitalize on Trump's directive that it's a good time to buy. And we will probably see over the next 30 days more of these Congress people filing their reports to show who else profited off of buying the dip. And, Democrats have capitalized on this moment to talk about call for investigations of insider trading. There's no evidence of insider trading, but this speaks to the general Democratic message, which is that Trump and his top allies and insiders are profiting at this moment when, working people are suffering. So Democrats have seized on this message. And what we saw is actually Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, saying that he would support a ban on congressional stock trading. That is a new position for Democratic leadership. Nancy Pelosi in the past was lukewarm about championing such a bill. So we're seeing kind of more momentum for a ban on stock trading among members pick up at this time.
And Annie, just to be clear, it's not illegal what she's done. It's the political price that she could pay. Take us through what exists in terms of ethics guidelines or rules that members have to follow.
Yeah, she's not breaking the law. There's actually members across the political spectrum, from AOC to Chip Roy, who's a far-right Republican from Texas, who have long championed banning congressional stock trading because it just looks really bad. It looks like, members of Congress have access to intelligence briefings, classified information. They meet with decision makers. It looks like they might have access to information that regular people don't. So it just looks bad. They're not breaking the law by doing this, but there has been momentum to try and pass a law that would not allow them to do this. And what most of them say when confronted about it is what Marjorie Taylor Greene told the AP, which is, I have someone doing this for me. I don't personally trade stocks. I don't personally know which stocks are being traded, but it's a very bad look at a moment when economic populism is popular, and it's not really a partisan issue. Both Republicans and Democrats, when they campaign, often say they would want to ban this practice because it gives the appearance that it's like swampy and these people are profiting where you can't.
Swampy indeed. I mean, that crowd, and we should say AOC and Bernie Sanders have been traveling the country and generating crowds that size, Christy, all over the place, and not just in Democratic strongholds. There is an appetite for economic populism that there hasn't been in many years.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say, at least from a criminal perspective of whether or not this is insider trading, understanding that Marjorie Taylor Greene has said, hey, I have a financial advisor, that person is taking care of all this, I don't have any input, it would be very easy to prove that. And so my question would be different than AOC's, not how much did you profit, but during this time period of a few days, did you pick up the phone and call your financial advisor? Were you in touch? Because if you have a managed account, generally you're talking to that person maybe once a quarter, maybe once a year. If you talk to your financial advisor during this time frame, that then is suspicious. And in that case, you would then want to know, what did you know when? Did you have advance information, inside information from Trump or others in the administration? And so it seems like all these politicians, it'd be a very easy thing to do. Produce your call logs. Were you in touch with your investment advisors before you bought the dip?
Annie, is there any evidence any of them were?
I mean, no, we don't have evidence of breaking the law, but what we have is like a very good grounds to bring up this issue again, and for Democrats calling for an investigation into, did insiders did they know something that other people didn't? Make it kind of the cost to these politicians will be political. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a bit of an untouchable figure. She's very popular in her blood red district in Georgia. But there's other ones like Rob Bresnahan, a Republican from Pennsylvania. He's more vulnerable, and he's a big stock trader. And, so there's other ones that this will just be a political toll on them.
The Trump administration continues its unprecedented targeting of foreign students, sowing panic and fear at universities all across the country as more than 1,000 students have had their legal status terminated in recent weeks. Just last week, an immigration judge ruled that Columbia University student and green card holder Mahmoud Khalil could be deported. But NBC News has learned that the government's case against Khalil is shaky after a review of more than 100 pages of documents submitted by the federal government in its efforts to deport Khalil. Quote, in some instances, the government appears to be relying on unverified tabloid articles about Khalil. In others, the government's claims about him are clearly erroneous because the timelines don't match. On Monday, another Columbia University student was taken into custody. Video shows Mohsen Madawi being detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents. And ICE detained Madawi outside a Vermont immigration office where he was scheduled for an interview that was supposed to be his final step in obtaining U.S. citizenship. Back with me are Paul Butler and former Congressman Charlie Dent. You know, Mr. Madawi did an interview actually before he went to this appointment on Monday and with CBS, and they aired it tonight. And I want to play for you all what he said because it was so striking. Take a listen.
When you got the appointment, what were your thoughts?
Mixed feelings, right? It's the first feeling of like, I've been waiting for this for more than a year. And the other feeling is like, wait a minute, is this a honey trap?
You think they could be calling you in to detain you?
Correct.
He said he thought it was a honey trap, and then honey got trapped.
No, he was right. It was a setup. He was wanted to become a citizen of the United States. He was a permanent legal resident. And this was the last step. It's kind of perfunctory. He would have been, but what was his crime? He said things that the president of the United States didn't agree with. He exercised the First Amendment rights that he has as a legal permanent resident of this country. And so I hope this will be quickly reversed by trial judges, by federal district trial judges, if it goes up to the Supreme Court, if they have any respect for the First Amendment. The Supreme Court will, with the quickness, say that this person deserves to be a citizen of the United States. You don't get to kick people out of this country when they're legally here because the president doesn't like what you say.
Can we put the video back up on the screen of Mr. Madawi being taken as we talk about this? Because, look, I think that it is. We were talking about this in the makeup room, and I'm like, the people who are being taken are students who are already here on student visas, and it seems that the only link is things that they have said or potentially like done, i.e., participating in protests or speaking out on a very specific issue, and there are no crimes. The people aren't being charged with crimes. And so this, I really do believe, is a gateway, because if we allow this to happen to a certain subset of people, who's to say, Charlie, that this can't happen they can't happen to me? I know they don't like what I'm saying.
Well, look, I don't know much about this individual, but he is a legal permanent resident. He's entitled to due process. He has rights, and he should be granted those rights. I think what's happening, though, with this administration, we have to look at this a little more broadly. Mm-hmm. They're trying to restrict immigration, clearly, and including students, many of whom, I even think the president talked about taking these STEM students from overseas and granting them green cards when they graduate. Well, this flies in the face of that. But you look at that, you dismantle USAID, you get rid of soft power, you impose tariffs, protectionism, putting the walls up, so to speak, and really restrict immigration. This is all part of a signal that the United States is not open for business, that we are disengaging and isolating ourselves, I think, to our detriment in many ways. And people around the world are noticing this. Mm-hmm. And many are also questioning our commitment to the rule of law. And it's not just affecting these people who are being held. It's also a signal to many people overseas who invest money in the United States. They want rule of law. They want that. That's one reason why they invest here. But this is sending a chilling message. I think it's much broader than we're talking about, rather than just these two individuals and whether or not they've been mistreated.
Right. I mean, look, we'll put the map up on the screen. These terminations of student visas, Paul, they have hit over half of the United States in at least 31 states, with officials largely citing a seldom used 1952 foreign policy statute to take aim at their activism. It feels like we are sliding to a place where, you know how Americans are always like, this isn't who we are. This would never happen in America. It is happening.
We've been done slid. So it's not just chilling effect for students. It's also law firms. It's federal judges. It's universities themselves. It's not just resistance that they're afraid of. They're afraid of science, of facts. So they want everybody to just kowtow to whatever the Trump administration does. And if you don't, well, we could think about what happened to Mahmoud Khalil. In the Saturday night, he's coming home from dinner. ICE shows up. They snatch him. They send him to Louisiana, a place that he's never been, and he doesn't have access to lawyers for a couple of days. And then the court rules that he gets to have his case tried there, where the court's much more conservative. So they're doing what they can to get away with it. But the message isn't just for people with green cards. The message is for anybody who would dare dissent from the Trump administration.
Jillian, let's start with traders, because they are killing it while the rest of America is scrambling, bracing for higher prices as businesses big and small are struggling to plan ahead. How does Scott Bessent still make the argument this is all about Main Street's turn?
Well, traders are indeed like vultures. When they see the bodies on the street, they start flapping and they start being able to find an advantage somehow. The reality is that Scott Bessent's argument, which is echoed by a number of the ideologues around President Trump right now, is that they're going to reorientate the economy away from excessive financialization. That means being pumped up by cheap money, and focus back onto old-fashioned manufacturing, Main Street, to create real jobs. So that is their argument. That's a guiding mantra. In terms of how it's actually playing out, well, the reality is that as the tariffs bite over the next few months, Main Street is going to feel more and more pain. And when it comes to financiers, yes, M&A is dead right now. Mergers and acquisitions activities on Wall Street is not happening. But certainly there are plenty of people out there in the financial world who are doing just fine.
I cannot find a single investor here or abroad or business person that I talk to, even those who support the president, who feel like the last 2 weeks, the rollout, the execution of this tariff plan is not without enormous flaws.
Well, we spoke at the Financial Times to Jamie Dimon today, head of JP Morgan, who essentially said that this is likely to leave the U.S. losing credibility in the eyes of the world. And you can see that by how investors are happening. It's not just the fact that they're behaving. They're not just going for gold. There was a big survey from Bank of America out this morning which shows that global investors have gone from being overweight America, meaning having more U.S. assets than the rest of the world, to being massively underweight all of a sudden. The reason for that? Liberation Day.
Luke, how is the White House managing this? Besides what the press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, will propose, or what she'll say from the podium in the White House press briefing room. At best, this has been a complete mess. At worst, an utter disaster. What do people inside the White House actually believe about this rollout?
Right. Well, I mean, quietly, they all are admitting that this went very poorly, obviously. For the bond market to downturn the way it did, for Trump to have to back off the tariffs after insisting repeatedly that he would never change his plans. Obviously, there was a big change in plans. They had to back off some of these tariffs, and now they're having to rush to negotiate something like 150 trade deals in 90 days. This is a huge undertaking. Now, publicly, what they'll say is it was all part of the plan. What you saw was the master negotiator, the art of the deal. You and the media were too dense to realize you were watching the master at work. But quietly, they had to scramble at the last minute to change things once the markets were tanking. That's just the truth of it. This was not part of the plan, and it went very poorly, and they had to change direction.
Natasha, let's talk about the IRS, because you wrote for the Washington Post today about Trump's gutting of the agency. It seems pretty clear You got the agency. It makes it significantly harder to collect taxes and easy for people to cheat. Am I wrong?
You are absolutely right. And today it's important to understand the IRS misses out on about $700 billion in owed taxes each year. That's about 3% of GDP on an annualized basis. And disproportionately, they're missing out on revenue that's coming from the very top of the distribution because regular people are sort of having their taxes withheld automatically. There's no real opportunity for them to evade their wage and salary income. But if you're at the top of the distribution and if you earn income in ways that are hard for the IRS to detect, you have opportunities to evade and cheat on your tax liabilities.
And cutting all your overhead at the IRS only makes it easier. If there is one thing they could do, it's actually improve the technology at the IRS. The systems they have are over a decade old. If the tech giants who are overseeing DOGE wanted to have a positive impact on the IRS, they would say, let me come in, let me bring in all the tech minds and let's give you new systems. But that's not happening, is it?
That's not happening. And Stephanie, it's not they're over a decade old. These are the oldest systems in the U.S. government. They date to the 1950s. And we're in a situation where it is incredibly hard for the IRS to maintain the systems because they're written in COBOL and you can't find people who still know that programming language. And with that infrastructure that is so out of date, what the agency is experiencing now is pulling back on all the resources that it had acquired to be able to invest in finally becoming a 21st century
Isn't
tax
this absurd?
administration.
Because if you were going to bring in the likes of an Elon Musk, if you had Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai, if you had all these guys cozying up to the president, wouldn't this be the perfect time for these American tech giants to say, we're going to bring our real expertise to the government and help you here?
We should have a reality check here because, as Natasha says, and these guys have been doing amazing work at the Yale Budget Labs recently, but if it's a case that $700 billion is going uncollected each year, that is more than 4 times what Elon Musk says he's found to save in Doge. So, frankly, he could stop all this Doge stuff immediately and just focus on using his digital brilliance to focus on making the IRS actually work. And he'd get a lot more money for his buck.
The fact that he's not begs the question. John, I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to you. When I have fierce, fabulous finance female minds here. Feisty. My attention stays here in New York. John, loads and loads of people like the idea of smaller government and the government spending less money. But when the Americans start to realize that those cuts are affecting their lives, right? As much as we love to hate on the IRS, if suddenly people aren't getting their refunds quickly, if they can't get the support they need, aren't they going to get frustrated quickly?
Yeah, if government doesn't work for them the way that they've come to expect it working for them, they will get frustrated. If you cut down Social Security offices and people can't get their Social Security checks, they're going to find that's a problem. If national parks are closed because there aren't enough people to service the parks, people are going to notice that. So you go through all the different things that government services that the government provides in services that people don't even think about because they take them for granted because they're there. Yeah, I think people are going to get very frustrated. And just one other note, and I appreciate you with all of the the financial females over there. You guys are killing it. But there's just one other thing I would say with the with the tariffs. There's all these people that pretend that Donald Trump is playing 4-dimensional chess, 5-dimensional chess, and all I would say is just because you're playing it doesn't mean you're any good at it. And what we've seen already with these economic shocks is that the chessboard has been overturned.
Yeah, it's more like we're playing Hungry Hippos, which, let me be clear, is an awesome game, but not a way to set global monetary policy. Luke, I want to talk about taxes in a different way, because after Harvard stood up to the president, lots of people today have said, Harvard won. Harvard did the right thing. But now you've got a president threatening to revoke the tax-exempt status of Harvard University, the oldest, most prominent university in the country. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty serious threat, and it shows how vindictive Donald Trump can be when someone stands up to him. But, I've been on the phone all day with people at Harvard, and they're feeling like somebody had to do this. I mean, the Trump administration was cracking down on law firms across the country, was cracking down on institutions of higher learning, was going after the media, and a lot of these law firms and colleges were settling and agreeing to the Trump administration's terms and making payments to him and so forth. And they really feel like somebody had to fight and somebody had to say, no, we're not going to take this. And if that means they take a several billion-dollar hit, well, maybe they're the one institution that's rich enough and powerful enough that can stand up for themselves and in doing so inspire others to do so. So there's a serious threat against them, and they're putting a lot on the line by fighting, but they feel that they're inspiring others to do the same.
I want to go back to the tariffs. Jillian, the Yale Budget Lab, which you helped launch, sort of broke down the tariffs and where and how they're going to affect people in our everyday lives. What's the most important thing we should know?
So the reality is that tariffs are tax increases, and they're tax increases that are borne disproportionately by low and middle income Americans, because those are the ones who are spending most of their incomes on consumption. We ran the numbers. We actually ran a new set of numbers today, and the average American family is going to face price increases of $4,700 over the course of the next year as a result of these tariffs. And that is going to be in things like textiles, which are going to go up by 67%. Things like consumer electronics, your iPhones, your laptops are going to go up by double digits. Fresh produce prices in the short run are going to be 5.4% higher. So these are things that people are going to tangibly feel. And what's so shocking to me in some sense is we are coming off the heels of historic inflation that really we experienced the American people reacting to very strongly. And so the idea that in response to that, we're then going to turn around and in a self-inflicted wound launch the most inflationary policies of my lifetime with this trade war is really kind of stunning.